Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to both of you for listening and your work during this session, and to the subcommittee chairs and members. I'm not going to discuss tolls here because that's a revenue item.
Thank you.
So much for that. So I have a few remarks. I will not be voting yes on this budget today. I will be voting no. So here's just a few observations, if I may. I won't go into detail about what bad shape our finances are in as a state. We all know that, and I think we all agree to it. It's not something where there is a fundamental disagreement. But knowing that, there's a few things here I'd like to say. First off, it's always disappointing when we know that the state's spending more than it takes in to see budgets spend more money than we spent before. And the governor's budget already did. And this budget spends a little bit more. It also has a lot of areas of missed. Kind of like, film that slips through your fingers. This is a big vote, out of appropriations today. It's the spending side of the budget. We wait for finance to see what it is going to do in the way of bonding and the transfer of the sales tax on new cars to the special transportation fund. Yeah, all that's revenue, but it determines ultimately the spending that we have to make to improve transportation. And I think, again, something we all agree on is that transportation is kind of like, if it's not priority number one, it's still right up there. It's one of the top. And we don't know where this leaves us. Whether it's more or less, we don't know. The hospital supplemental payments and tax. Someone made the remark earlier, it may have been Representative Abercrombie, that it's not something that we should be negotiating sitting here as a large group doing a budget, but it's a huge part of the budget. And we are left with that being uncertain. The issue of the towns paying a part of the teachers' pension costs, hey, that's a revenue item, but there was a statement that you all have said was in error, but it was in the budget it was in what was printed that said that it is not recommended according to this budget to do that, to push those costs down. However, you say that, so it was discussed somewhere, even though it's a revenue item. So what you've said today is that you think it will happen, but you're not making a recommendation on it one way or the other. It's a huge part of the budget, because if it happens or doesn't happen, it affects what is spent out of the money that is currently sitting at the state level. Also, there's some uncertainty about discussions with the unions that are held by the governor. Those discussions are held by the governor. That's his purview. But we're not really sure where that's going either. All we know is that it's probably not as much as what the governor said he initially expected to be able to achieve. So there's that aspect of things where we have a document that's not complete. We have a document that there's a lot of big portions of it that are missing. And it's difficult, faced with constituents, to vote in favor of something when we don't really know what it ultimately will say. There's another aspect here of some priorities that, and they are on principle, they're very good, but they're expensive. So you have a paid family leave program, which would start out with $5 million, but again and again in budget documents, we've seen the aim of hiring 120, 130 people to manage that. We know that there's a lot of discussion about how much it would cost, but it would cost a lot. We've seen a serious estimate here of what the state would have to spend to keep the private providers whole were the minimum wage increase passed. And we've seen $1 million for at least assessing the public option plan, but all of that is in the mix. And they're just examples of when you've got a state that's in very, very dire financial straits, ideas, even when good, if they're very, very expensive, is furthering a political agenda at the expense of a very much increased burden to the people of the state the right time. And I think it's kind of like when you have a child who's going to college and you're going to pay for it, but the child says, no, I want a new car now. And you have to say, wait a minute, can't you wait for your car till you get your college education and you can earn the money yourself? So that's another misgiving I have. Another is the idea of stretching out the teacher pension payments to 2049, I believe it is. And I understand the theory behind that. But again, we've been told this comes at a total cost of $17 billion, which you can add to the $11 billion that's stretching out the state employee retirement cost, that those payments. That's a lot of money, 17 plus $11 billion. So that too, and that's a cost for future generations for sure. You know, and finally, we really appreciated the situation of the last couple of sessions when passing a budget was necessary to have bipartisan cooperation to get a budget passed. And we did a lot of work together. We didn't lead with taxes, and we didn't lead with increased spending. And this budget does seem to lead with increased taxes. We don't know what they are yet, but that's the question. We know they're there, we just don't know which ones. And so we have to wait for that. But that's hard to do. That's just hard for me to do given what we've seen the last 8 years. So again, we're voting today. This may not have been your decision, Mesdames Chairs, but it's a situation we find ourselves in where we have to wait for finance. And I don't think that's fair to our constituents. So with all of those things in mind, I will not be voting for the budget today. Thank you for your indulgence.